You've been called the happiest man in the world. Can you share a technique for the Rewire Me community to help join others in your wonderful state?
Well, if I was the happiest person in the world, I could give you some tricks, but this is a big joke. I have nothing to say. Well, you know, this is just something happened in the newspaper, but newspapers are not scientists, and I don't know how they figure out of 7 billion human beings, including great spiritual teachers and others,
found you.
Who is me? But anyway, it's just like this thing of this
scans.
piece of tape that sticks to your fingers and you don't know how to get rid of it. So, of course, it's better than to be called the unhappiest person in the world. And one of my teachers said, you know, stop making disclaimers, just go along the flow and use that for a good purpose. So I guess I have to live with that. It's not a bad thing, but it doesn't fit with reality. So now, this doesn't mean that, you know, according to the teachings I receive and all what I could gather, that there's no better way to look for happiness in the right place. And because usually we yearn for happiness and we seem to be turning our back to it. We apprehend suffering and seems we are addicted to the cause of suffering. So that's that's something, you know, that all the teachings have something to say about that. It's basically we are lured by believing that putting all our hopes and fear in the outer conditions, you know, if I had this, if I had that, if I was famous, if I was beautiful, if I was successful, if I had a lot of resources, I will be happy. And when you see someone who is beautiful, powerful, you know, famous, and then we hear there's an abused, nervous breakdown, and you say, what's wrong with this guy? If I had all that, I will be happy, of course. It's just like a delusion, because this means that we don't pay attention to the inner conditions for well-being. And if we look at that, it's nothing about fame and wealth and so forth. It's about how much inner freedom you have. Are you or not the slaves of every single thought that comes in your mind? Are you the slave of afflictive emotions? Are you confused? Do you lack discernment about what leads to suffering for you and others or not? So all these inner factors, we sometimes vastly overlook them. So to look for happiness or flourishing or at least freedom from suffering in the right place is to look at removing delusion, getting rid of hatred, of jealousy, of arrogance, of envy, of greed, of craving. So those are what are the poisons to happiness. So, or at least the causes of suffering, which is basically the same. So the ultimate happiness only is enlightenment, which is actually beyond the concept of happiness and suffering. But until then, everyone wants to aspire to get rid of suffering. And so the corresponding aspect is well-being, being well in the depth of one's being. So happiness is a term that has been often misused, but well-being in the sense not of comfort, but of being fundamentally well in our being, with this state of freedom and sort of inner strength and inner peace. That's something we can cultivate as skills through mental training, through training also in discernment and wisdom. So those are the fundamentals of any spiritual path, especially in Buddhism that's the case, but also in a secular way. The more we can get rid of this afflictive mental state, the more we'll enjoy more peace and satisfaction and contentment.
You know, I just realized in this moment that you are 100% right about that term happiness. It's misused, and people have the impression, including myself until this moment, that happiness is something that, you know, can be acquired. It's, you know, based on certain elements, but really it has nothing to do with that. It's really just a state of being. And for someone like me who doesn't have as much practice as you do, being in that state of the non-suffering and non-attachment, it's, my interpretation is just being in a place where all my needs are met. There's nothing that I want.
Depends what you
There's
needs.
nothing that I need. There's nothing that, and so I'm just in a place of such inner peace where I would just want to give.
Well,
back
sure.
to
I mean,
society?
needs, it depends what you need. I mean, you always need more wisdom, more freedom, until you get the ultimate one. You've got completely rid of ignorance and confusion. But in terms of outer needs, you know, there's a Tibetan saying that contentment is like holding a treasure in the palm of your hand. Because if you are content, that's all you need.
Right.
If you are not contented,
Right.
even you own the whole planet, still will not be enough, because this kind of craving is never satisfied by nature. And it is, we give the example in Buddhist teaching, if you drink salty water, the more you drink, the more you are thirsty. And that's what happens with craving. That's why we come into addiction. At some point we don't even like what you are craving for, but you still want it. So you're addicted to the cause of suffering. So one of my teachers says, Jimmy Kensei Rinpoche, he says, he told us once, what you call happiness here, we call it suffering.
Right. Makes sense.